The Modi government has rolled out what's being called Atmanirbhar Bharat 3.0, the big Diwali stimulus package, at a time when the Indian economy entered a technical recession for the first time since quarterly GDP numbers have been calculated by the RBI. Joining us now, Rajya Sabha Member of Parliament of the Congress, former Finance and Home Minister, and one of the country's leading economic voices, Mr. P Chidambaram. Mr. Chidambaram, welcome to the news track. The Finance Minister, very emphatic in the press conference she did this afternoon to say that green shoots of recovery are strongly visible, that India is bouncing back from this economic hit. What's your view, sitting in the opposition, about the manner in which the Indian economy seems to be attempting to come out of this recession?
I've heard these words, green shoots are visible, for the last almost 6 months. They said it in the first quarter of this year, they said it in July, they said it in August, they said it in September. Just go back and look at the archives of newspapers and your own shows. How can you say that green shoots are visible when the first quarter returned a negative economic growth of 23.9%, and the second quarter will return a negative economic growth of 8.6%. And believe me, third quarter also will record negative economic growth. 1.5 months of the third quarter are over, and there are no signs that we are getting into positive territory. I don't see green shoots. Either I'm blind or colorblind, but I don't see green shoots yet.
Sir, GST collections have again bounced beyond 1 lakh crore rupees. Unemployment rate, according to CMI, is coming down. The Purchasing Managers Index is at a decadal high. So there are some shoots available. The government's belief at this time is we need to instill confidence in the economy amongst consumers, amongst industry, because only with that confidence will we truly re-emerge.
They are still addressing the supply side. They have failed to address the demand side. The Purchasing Managers Index is an index. It's not real numbers of the economy. It's an index. I saw likewise the Finance Minister boast about the sensex. Now, the sensex is a number. Nifty is a number. Of course, it benefits those who invest in the stock market, but less than 1% invest in the stock market. We are looking for real numbers. The only real number which is positive is agriculture, because our farmers are producing. Coronavirus or no coronavirus, a farmer has to go to the field and plow and sow and spray fertilizers and pesticides and weed and then harvest. But except agriculture, I don't see any positive growth in any sector. Don't go by these monthly numbers. Auto sales are up in a month. But that doesn't mean a long-term trend on auto sales is being established. So let's look for numbers over a period of time. GST will go up in 1 month and go down in another month. Does it establish a trend? So look at real numbers. Don't look at these artificial indicators.
You're saying the government's only tackling the supply side of the problem. We've spoken to the top economic voices in the government. They are saying that their approach is different from what you and many global economists have advocated, that there must be direct cash transfers. Even in the announcements that have been made today with EPFO, they're trying to incentivize formal job creation. This government's economic philosophy seems to suggest they don't believe that beyond a point you put cash into the hands of the last man. They want to encourage industry to create jobs because they believe that is better use of the money, more bang for the buck, because that's self-sustaining, rather than give them money. Once it's over, you're back to square one.
I see the difference in approach, but we think it's wrong. Why does America, Britain, Germany, Japan, France, why do all these countries put money in the hands of people? The world's richest country, the United States, puts money in the hands of every person every month. Now, we can always find an economist who will support the government's position. But I can name a dozen economists who have said transfers are the best way to revive demand, from Dr. Raghuram Rajan to Dr. Jahangir Aziz. I can name a dozen economists, including the Nobel laureate, who have said that transfer of cash is the surest way to revive the economy. I agree. This is a different point of view. But the government doesn't listen to us. We can only speak up. We can only write. We can only demand that this be done. But the government is deaf to our pleas, deaf to the advice of world-renowned economists. What can I do?
The government can argue that their approach also had economic validation. Despite the recession, despite migration, despite the pandemic, despite the lockdown, it's the National Democratic Alliance that won a hard-fought election in Bihar. All these factors together, under normal circumstances, backed with 15 years of anti-incumbency, would have been a knockout blow for any government. Despite everything, they still won, Mr. Chidambaram.
If you think that the Bihar vote is a validation of the government's economic policy, I think you're wrong. Bihar is the poorest state in India. The Prime Minister has been in office since 2014. Mr. Nitish Kumar has been in office since 2005. And yet Bihar is the poorest state. The last persons who should speak about the economy of Bihar are Mr. Modi and Mr. Kumar. Now look at the vote in Bihar. I agree, the Congress party's performance disappointed me, and I'm sure the CWC will take note of that. But look at the popular vote, 37.26% for the NDA and 37.23% for the Mahagathbandhan. What is the difference? 0.03. Can you imagine what 0.03 is? It's a few thousand votes. Because we have a winner past the post system, that translates into 125 seats and 110 seats. So don't look at the Bihar verdict as a resounding verdict for the NDA, and certainly it's not a validation of the economic performance of this government.
So what you're saying is correct, yes and no, because in the end, jo jeeta wahi Sikandar, whether it's by a few thousand up or a few thousand down, that's the way elections are decided, and it happened in the United States as well. Donald Trump fought hard, but in the end, Joe Biden was a little in front. If they've been able to, despite all of what you mentioned in terms of economic recession, dispossession, people not having jobs, then the government should have been blown out of office, which didn't happen. It isn't a resounding victory, but it's a victory nonetheless.
I agree. Who takes away from their victory? It is a tribute to their economic management. It's not a tribute to their economic management. It is a tribute to their election management. It's perhaps also a tribute to the tactical steps they took in different constituencies. It's a tribute to the organizational strength of the RSS and the BJP. And I'm not taking away a bit from the election victory of the NDA. They won an election, and therefore they're entitled to form the government, and it's a perfectly legitimate government. I'm only disagreeing with you that it is a validation of the economic policies of the government. That I don't think so.
Sure, but what does it reflect about the opposition? Despite all these problems, and you've been in electoral office, you realize how anti-incumbency builds up. If it is the government and the NDA and the BJP that comes to power, the connect of the Prime Minister with the people, to be able to get them to believe him even now, despite everything that you believe has happened and how people should be reacting to it, ultimately it's the Prime Minister who, through his sheer connect with the voters of Bihar, was able to carry the NDA through. Sitting in opposition, what do you make of that, Mr. Chidambaram?
I don't disagree with you. In fact, I should ask you the question. What did your exit poll say? Your exit poll. India Today's exit poll. So I don't disagree with you. it is certainly endorsement of the fact that the NDA managed the election much better. The NDA carried its narrative much better. Mr. Tejashwi Yadav, a young leader, was pitted against a formidable Mr. Narendra Modi, Mr. Nitish Kumar, Mr. Sushil Kumar Modi, and other tall leaders of the BJP. But why don't you also pay compliment to Mr. Tejashwi Yadav's tireless election campaign, which brought him nearly to the door of victory. He still is the single largest party in Bihar. He edged out the BJP. His resources were a fraction of the BJP's resources. He was a lone campaigner for the Mahagathbandhan, especially the RJD, whereas the BJP had a whole range of campaigners. Therefore, while you endorse and compliment the Prime Minister, please endorse and compliment Mr. Tejashwi Yadav also.
Oh, most certainly. Tejashwi ran a very spirited campaign, received a huge response. But what does that suggest, sir, about the inability of the Congress, even after being out of office for since 2014, to build some kind of a base? You had the fewest rallies from your top leadership. Many of your top leaders didn't go at all. Amongst the lowest strike rates, couldn't even hold on to the number of seats you had the last time. And many in the RJD are saying, including some in the Congress, that if the Gathbandhan isn't in power, it's because of the inability of the Congress to get its act in order.
I have told you that I'm disappointed. Sitting in Chennai and not part of the election campaign in Bihar, I can't say more than that. All I can say is the CWC will certainly review the performance and draw the lessons and take corrective action. Hope so.
Since you are in Chennai, can I ask you about the impact this could have on the Tamil Nadu elections? We're already seeing the likes of Prashant Kishore, who's advising Mr. Stalin and the DMK, suggest that it is better to go it alone than to go in partnership with the Congress, that the Congress in the last elections was the weak link. We've already seen what happened in Uttar Pradesh and now recently in Bihar. Therefore, keep the Congress out. So instead of the allies wanting to be with the Congress, are you concerned that maybe the DMK will decide they don't want the Congress in the assembly elections?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Mr. Stalin, the DMK know the value that the Congress in Tamil Nadu brings to the DMK alliance. In 2000, the previous election was 2016. In the one before that, the DMK did not take the Congress into an alliance. The 2019 Parliament, I'm sorry, 2014 Parliament election, and both the DMK and the Congress lost all the seats. Therefore, I think the DMK knows the value which the Congress in Tamil Nadu, and I'm only speaking about Tamil Nadu, brings to the alliance. And there are also examples of Congress winning in Rajasthan, winning in Chhattisgarh, winning in Jharkhand in alliance with the JMM, winning in Madhya Pradesh until the government was stolen by the BJP, winning in Karnataka until the government was stolen by the BJP. Therefore, if you put one Bihar on one of the sides of the scale, I can give 4 or 5 examples to put on the other side. Not that I'm trying to gloss over what happened in Bihar. As I said, and I can only say that, sitting in Chennai, I can only say we are disappointed.
What are the larger national political consequences of the verdict and the current economic situation? You've got from the opposition's perspective, what you'd consider a disconnect. You think economic distress is building up, the government still growing strong despite all the problems that you cited. In the end, they managed to go through and win the election. What are the larger national political consequences of this, sir?
Unquestionably, the economy weighs on the minds of the people. In fact, it weighed on the minds of the voters of Bihar too. But it was counterbalanced by some other factors: election management, resources, campaign style, campaign tactics. But you will see in the elections of next year, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Bengal, Assam, Puducherry, you will find that the economy is the biggest talking point. In fact, in Tamil Nadu, we will talk about the economy. In Kerala, they will talk about the economy, apart from state-specific issues. If you think that people have forgotten and forgiven the dire straits in which the economy finds itself, you are wrong. Talk to young people, talk to women. Please understand, the labor force is shrinking and the unemployment rate is rising. Jobs which were lost have not come back. New jobs have not been created. The bottom half, or certainly the bottom 1/3 of the population, is in utter poverty. The poverty number has increased. Inequality has increased. Infant mortality has increased, all in the last 2-3 years. And these are statistics which came out today about infant mortality increasing and inequality increasing. So don't think that the economy can be wished away by one Bihar result.
But would you agree that the worst is now behind the country and it can't get worse than what we've been through? We can argue about the speed of recovery and the trajectory and the policy maneuvers, but the way forward will involve an upward trajectory.
It is a no-brainer. If the economy has sunk to minus 23.9% in one quarter, it can only go up. It can't go further down than minus 23.9. If people produce wheat and paddy and sugarcane, and people produce bicycles and two-wheelers and cars, if people produce cloth and footwear, the economy will only go up. The question is, what is the government doing to hasten the revival? What is government doing to quicken the revival? Are they taking the right steps? If the government did nothing also, Rahul, if the government did nothing, the economy will still revive. Question is when and how quickly.
At this moment, what would you like to see the government push through to speed up the recovery in the economy, Mr. Chidambaram? What would be your key policy recommendation?
I listed a number of steps in a number of articles in the past. Let me list only 4 today. Number 1, farmers are producing. I pay tribute to the farmers. They must be paid fair and remunerative prices. Only a fraction of India's farmers get the MSP. And even that is in jeopardy after the 2 farm bills have been passed. Government must find a way in which more and more farmers in every harvest, Rabi, Kharif, more and more farmers get the MSP, more and more farmers get fair and remunerative prices. Number 2, the government must put money in the hands of the very poor people. My constituency is a rural constituency. I know the kind of poverty they are. Tamil Nadu is not such a poor state as Bihar, but even in Tamil Nadu, the bottom 25% or 20% or 33% is in very dire poverty. You'll have to put money in their hands, which is why we plead for cash transfer. Number 3, the government must try to bring back jobs. This requires a sectoral approach. What is good for tourism and hospitality may not be good for manufacturing automobiles. What is good for software may not be good for MSMEs. You'll have to have a sectoral approach to bring back jobs, reopen or revive closed businesses. Lakhs of MSMEs have closed down. You have to bring back the jobs and then incentivize those who are already back in production to increase the number of jobs. And finally, the government must ensure that capital expenditure is not cut. Please ask the government tomorrow, They budgeted a capital expenditure. At the end of this year, what will be the capital expenditure? States are going to cut 2.7 lakh crore rupees to the budgeted capital expenditure. When they presented the budget in February, March, they had planned a capital expenditure out of which they're going to cut 2.7 lakh crore, which is about 50%. So unless capital expenditure of the center and states goes back to near the budgeted amount, how can there be a revival of growth? These are the 4 steps that I would urge the government to immediately adopt.
Well, you've presented an alternate point of view on what you think the government ought to be doing at this time, Mr. Chidambaram. You've also accepted the shortcomings in the verdict in Bihar, but you're hopeful that the DMK will stay on board with the Congress in that big battle in Tamil Nadu. We wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Chidambaram.